I'm continuing a series that I started last week on why the church matters. And I'll just put this in context one more time. Over the last 2 decades, we have seen increasing criticism of the church, much of it deserved, about the church being the sins of the church being irrelevant. And we have seen the declining influence of the church in the lives of our communities. So I'm mounting a defense of the church. Last week we talked about why the church matters to our children. Next week we'll talk about why the church matters to our neighbors. Usually around here, when we talk about neighbors, we're talking about mission programs. But I'm going to use that term in a different way next week. The final week, we'll talk about why the church matters to you and me. But today, why the church matters to our city. And we'll talk about that in some very specific ways. Let me invite you to turn to the 2nd chapter of Acts. The book of Acts is really the history of the early church. If you are familiar with Acts or with the story of Pentecost, you know that it begins right there, takes place, it's the birthday of the church. It takes place right there in the first few verses of the 2nd chapter. And here we go to verse 42. And so what I'm going to read to you is a description of the early church, and it's the earliest known description of the early church. They devoted themselves to the apostles' teaching and fellowship, to the breaking of bread, and to their prayers. All came upon everyone because many wonders and signs were being done by the apostles. All who believed were together and had all things in common. They would sell their possessions and goods and distribute the proceeds to all as any had a need. In other words, they were building community and they were taking care of the poor. Day by day, as they spent much time together in the temple, they broke bread at home and ate their food with glad and generous hearts, praising God and having the goodwill of all the people. I don't know that there's ever been a sermon preached about the fact that the early church had the goodwill of non-Christians in the city of Jerusalem. But that's what this text tells us. They had the goodwill of those who were not a part of the church because they saw the example of what they were doing. And day by day, the Lord added to their number those who were being saved. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. The other day, I was in Presbyterian Hospital here in Plano. If you know where Presbyterian is, it's on the west side of the toll road. I was up there visiting George Higgins, one of our wonderful members. He was on the 8th floor. When I got ready to leave, I started towards the staircase going down the east wing of the hospital. And as I got there, I saw this big plate glass window and this wonderful view of the city of Plano. And I wondered, I thought, I wonder if I can see our church from up here. It's a long ways off, so I didn't really think that I could, but I couldn't help but remember the wonderful testimonies I've heard from people who have been in Medical City, Plano, which is not far from here. And they talk about how they could look outside their window or go down the hallway and see our church, and what a comfort it was to be able to see our church, how much peace it brought to them. So I went down the hallway and I looked out to the east, and sure enough, I could see our church's steeple prominent on the landscape. And it just made me feel good. I have to tell you that as I drive around and look at our churches here in the city of Plano, it always makes me feel good. You may not be aware of this, but Plano is an extraordinary city in Methodism. 4 of the largest churches in Methodism are located here in the city of Plano. There's no city like this. And so when I drive around and look at these churches and think about the influence that they have had, it is always inspiring to me. I like driving east over there to around Jupiter and Spring Creek, I think it is. I like seeing the steeple of First United Methodist Church in Plano and thinking about the work that they do. I like driving north on Custer Road and seeing Custer Road United Methodist Church, one of the great churches in Methodism, and thinking about the wonderful work they have done through the years. I like driving down the toll road and looking out on the east side and seeing the steeple of the great St. Andrew's United Methodist Church. And this is not just about Methodism, it's really about churches in general. I like driving down the toll road and looking out on the west side and seeing the steeple of Prestonwood Baptist Church. I don't like it as much, but... And I started thinking, I wonder what this city would be like without its churches. I wonder what our community would be like if the churches in the city of Plano and the surrounding areas had not had such a remarkable influence over the last 30 or 40 or 50 years. So I want to talk about that just for a moment this morning. It's Communion Sunday. I don't have a long time, but I want to talk about that just a little bit. I'm just going to talk about our church because that's the history that I know, of course, but I think you could apply this to one degree or another to a lot of churches in our city. For one thing, I think about leadership. I've been your pastor for 30 years, and I may have missed a year or two, but I don't think so. I don't believe that there's ever been a year in the 30 years that I've been here at Christ Church when we didn't have at least one member of our church sitting on the city council. And I remember a number of years when one of our members, I see Pat Evans sitting right back there, was the mayor of our city. I don't remember a year when we didn't have somebody on the commissioner's court or on the Plano Independent School District Board of Trustees. And I just think about the remarkable leadership that we have seen from our church members and others in terms of leading this city and the values that have been expressed and committed to in the life of the community and what it would be like without the leadership of our churches in the city of Plano and surrounding areas here in North Dallas. And then I think about the things that have taken place, the programs that have taken place that really are because of the churches. I noticed the other day, I heard the news, the 8th anniversary of Hurricane Katrina. And some of you were here then, and you remember this remarkable and disastrous story. Hundreds of thousands of people coming out of New Orleans. And the word came to us that they were coming to North Dallas and to Plano and the city and the county commissioner's court turned to the churches and first and foremost to Christ Church. We just built our Christian fellowship building over here, the Christian Life Center over here. And we had plans, of course, to play basketball, have a children's basketball league, and we had the workout area over there, and a lot of different things. We wanted to have strong recreational ministries. We just opened it a few months earlier. All of a sudden, we realized that, as is always the case, God's plan was bigger than our plan. And so we created what became known as Hotel Katrina. And first and foremost, we invited those evacuees into our life of our community. We took care of them. Some of them are still around. And I've often said that when the history of Christ Church is finally written, there will be a whole chapter devoted to Hotel Katrina because it was a transforming moment, both for those who were our guests, but certainly for our church as well. It literally changed us forever. We knew who God was calling us to be for sure after that. But I think about what it meant to our city. And of course, Project Hope. A lot of you don't know about Project Hope. It's a wonderful program. We do all sorts of mission programs in the life of our church where we support food pantries and other kinds of things. But we wanted a life-changing program where our people could become involved. And in fact, we've had over 1,000 people involved as volunteers with Project Hope, where lives are literally changed, where we're giving people an opportunity to learn skills where they can become self-sufficient. And through Project Hope, people have bought homes that they never thought they'd be able to buy a home. They've gotten college degrees. They've received jobs. And then, of course, House on the Corner. House on the Corner now, the 10th one sitting right out here. You're going to see it leaving probably this week to go over to the Douglas community. House on the Corner really no longer even belongs to Christ Church. We get it started and everything, of course, but in many ways it belongs to the city because people will literally walk in off the streets and say, "How can I get involved? Hammer some nails or do some painting on House on the Corner. We have people throughout our community who make donations. The other day we had a man walk in and make a substantial, just wrote a check. He said, if I write a check, will it be dedicated to House on the Corner? We said, of course. A substantial check. One of the things that has been a goal of our staff for some time, we've never announced this as and I don't know why, but we talk about it often in our staff, and that is that we want our church to be a blessing to this city. We want it to be considered by the city and by the constituents within our city as a treasure to this community. And by that I mean that we want it to be valued for who we are, the kind of neighbor and community participant we are. We want it to be valued not only by other church people, but by other denominations. Muslims, we've built bridges with Muslims. They've come in and worked on House on the Corner. There's this wonderful man that many of you have seen. He wears a turban. He's a Sikh. He's from India. The religion is Sikh. He's a wonderful, gentle man, and he enjoys coming. He's at the last service and worshiping with us. So we want to be a bridge builder in our city, and we want to be valued for the kinds of values and commitment we make to those who are not just a part of our church, including atheists and agnostics. And I feel confident that there are atheists and agnostics today, people who generally don't affirm the church, who will say that Christ's church has been a treasure, a blessing to this city because of their civic values. You see, we've seen a declining influence in the life of the church over the last several decades. I grew up in Dallas, and I remember back in the 1950s, no major initiative could take place in the city of Dallas. I'm talking about something that really affected the people, something that was widely understood and known by the people, without being signed off on by Dr. Criswell at First Baptist Church, by Dr. Robert E. Goodrich at First Methodist Church, by Dr. Marshall Steele at Highland Park. Such was the influence of the church back in those days. In these days, we see the declining influence of the church. And whether it's causation or simple correlation, I don't know. But I think you can see the fraying of the social fabric that holds us together. And the case I'd like to make for you this morning is that our churches help to weave the social fabric that helps us become a civil society at our very best. And you see it here in this story from Acts telling us this really a primitive view. The very first glimpse we get of the church, it's right after Pentecost. People are just now becoming converted, giving their lives to Christ. But what we see is a church that becomes a treasure to the city of Jerusalem. We're told that they come together, they love one another, they create fellowship, they care for the poor. And they are respected by other members of the community who are not a part of their group. That's a pretty good model for us today, isn't it? The church is a kind of, in addition to all of the things that the church means to those on the inside, the church is a kind of religious, civic partner that makes a difference in the life of the community. We were sitting around the other day in a senior staff meeting, and Clay Horton, who is our new campus pastor in Princeton. We haven't even gotten going in Princeton yet, but he lives there and he spends some of his time over there. And he made a report about Princeton. Princeton's got a community of about 18,000 people. And if you drive through Princeton, you'll see nice homes like you would see here in the city of Plano. Drive through there on 380, you'll see this wonderful new high school and athletic facility. Everything looks wonderful. But one of the school principals over there had taken him for a ride into one of the poorer sections of Princeton. And Clay was describing it. I'll never forget what he said. He said, we drove down this street and there were just little shacks that were literally falling apart. He said there were one or two trailer houses, little tiny trailers like travel trailers, where people were living. The doors were missing. And there were people living inside there, including children. And then he said something, I'll never forget him saying this, just very matter-of-factly. He said, those won't be there 5 years from now. Those won't be there 5 years from now. My heart just swelled with pride because I thought, he gets it. This remarkable commitment. He was saying once the church gets there, we will not allow that kind of mind-boggling poverty to exist. And you say, well, that's pretty bold. It won't be there 5 years from now. He's 29 years old. He's young. He should be idealistic. But isn't that a little bit naive? I don't think so. I don't think so. The commitment of Christ Church in the realm of dealing with poverty and homelessness. We've got a new homeless project coming up, by the way. You'll be hearing about it. Denise Peckham's been working on it. Larry Rex, who runs our House on the Corner program, was down at the city the other day. They gave him this printout. I want to show it to you. It's from HUD. And it's a report about the Douglas community. And I'll simplify it for you. Just look over there on the right-hand side. And this is more than Christ Church. You understand that. In the year 1988, 75% of the homes in the Douglas community were considered to be substandard. Today, that number is 14.7%. You bet. You bet. We're almost there, wiping out substandard community in the Douglas community. And of course, it hasn't all been Christ Church by any means. Lots of people working in the Douglas community, but you ask them at the city, that's why they give us a grant to help make it happen. You ask them at the city the role that Christ Church has played, they'll tell you we've been a leader, we've played a major role. And so when Clay Horton says, those won't be there 5 years from now, he was dead serious. He was dead serious. What would our community look like if we were not here? And what would it look like if our churches were to have an ascending role as civic partners in the lives of our cities? Our bishop has a wonderful way of talking about how to evaluate churches. Because there's a lot of talk in Methodism these days about how you can quantitatively evaluate the vitality of a church. You know, you can do that by saying, is the church growing? Are there more members on the rolls? We've never cared a whole lot about how many members we have on our rolls. We've got a lot, but that's never been a big issue for us. Is there increasing worship attendance? That's a big issue for us. Increasing numbers of children in Sunday school. There are a lot of ways of talking about the vitality of a church. But I love what the bishop says. Sometimes my colleagues get a little paranoid about that. They're going to be running the numbers on us. And what if my church is in a place where it can't grow? And our bishop puts it this way. He says, what would it look like? What would your community look like if your church were not there? Have you made a difference? Have you changed the community? As I said, I can't even imagine what this place would look like, what our community would look like, had this church and others not been here over the last 30 or 40 years or more. So going forward, what difference would it make if we were to make this commitment that we will continue to grow in our commitment to the city, that we would enlarge our role as bridge builders in our city, if we were to increase our role in addressing the issues of poverty and homelessness in our city, if we were to expand our commitment to help weaving together the social fabric that holds communities together, what difference would it make? The church, I believe, matters more than ever before. It changes the lives of our cities. Thanks be to God. Amen.